The first time my wife laughed while another man called me useless, I did not raise my voice, I did not defend myself, and I did not tell anyone in that ballroom that the man they were mocking owned the building they were standing in. My name is Jack Reynolds, 42 years old, born in Ohio, raised in Michigan, and for most of my adult life I learned that real power does not always wear a name tag. Sometimes it wears a plain navy suit, drives a 7-year-old pickup, and stands quietly beside a woman who has forgotten who helped build the life she shows off. That Friday night, the Grand Meridian Hotel in downtown Chicago glittered like it had been polished for a movie scene. Crystal chandeliers hung over the ballroom like frozen fireworks. Waiters moved between white linen tables with trays of sparkling water, iced tea, and small plates no one really ate. Outside, the city was wrapped in November cold, the kind that makes your breath show under streetlights. But inside that room, everything was warm, golden, expensive, and fake. My wife, Emily, stood 20 feet away from me in a silver dress that caught every flash from every camera. She looked beautiful. I will not lie about that. Beauty was never the problem with Emily. The problem was what she did with it when she believed it gave her permission to treat people like furniture. She had one hand resting on the arm of Chad Morrison, Atlas Crown Technologies' new chief operating officer, a man with perfect teeth, a loud laugh, and the kind of confidence that usually comes from never having been told the full truth. Emily tilted her head back at something he said, laughing like the room had been built around her. I stood near the edge of their circle, holding a glass of club soda, watching my wife perform the version of herself she saved for public rooms. Successful, polished, untouchable, married, technically, but only when it helped her image. To everyone at that company dinner, I was just Jack, Emily's quiet husband. The man who fixed the garage door on weekends. The man who packed her lunch when she forgot to eat. The man who did not correct people when they assumed her promotion had made her the impressive one in the marriage. I had let that story breathe for years because silence was useful. Silence lets people reveal what they truly believe. And that night, they revealed plenty. It started small, the way humiliation often does. A joke tossed across a table. A glance held a second too long. Someone asking me if I worked between jobs because Emily had once described me as taking time off. I smiled politely. I had been in boardrooms where billion-dollar decisions were made with less noise than that table used to order dessert. Then Chad lifted his glass and said, loud enough for half the ballroom to hear, "So Jack, tell us the secret. How does it feel being married to the woman carrying the whole household?" A few people chuckled. Emily looked down at her champagne flute, smiling into it instead of stopping him. That was the first cut, not the joke. Her smile. Chad leaned in, encouraged by the laughter. "No, seriously. Emily closes deals all week, runs circles around half the executive floor, and you just get to show up looking relaxed. That must be nice." More laughter. I felt it move through the table like a cold draft under a door. One woman covered her mouth, pretending she was embarrassed, but her eyes were bright with entertainment. Another man slapped Chad's shoulder like he had just said something brave. Emily finally looked at me, and for one second I thought I might see regret. I did not. I saw warning. The kind of look that said, "Do not ruin this for me." That was when something in my chest went still. Not angry. Not broken. Still. There is a difference. Anger shakes. Stillness calculates. I took a slow breath and set my glass on the table. The ice clicked once against the rim, a tiny clean sound under all that laughter. Chad was not finished. Men like him rarely are when a room rewards them. "Come on, Jack," he said, spreading his hands. "You have to admit, it takes confidence to let your wife be the star. Some guys would feel threatened. But you? You seem comfortable being in the background." Emily laughed then. Not loudly, not cruelly enough for strangers to notice, but I heard it. A soft, practiced little laugh. The kind she used when she wanted to. Belonged to the room more than she wanted to belong beside me. I looked at her hand still resting near Chad's sleeve, at the diamond bracelet I had bought her after her mother's surgery, at the company pin shining on her dress. Atlas Crown. My company, though almost no one in that ballroom knew it. 15 years earlier, I had built the first version of its logistics software in a rented office above a tire shop outside Detroit, eating gas station sandwiches at midnight and sleeping under my desk during winter storms. I had taken no applause when investors came. I had stepped back before the public launch, letting appointed executives become the faces of it while I remained majority owner through a private holding structure. It was cleaner that way, safer, quieter. Emily knew parts of it, not all. She knew I had money. She knew I had sold some software. She did not know that Atlas Crown's Chicago expansion, her department, Chad's title, even the ballroom reservation that night, all traced back to signatures I had made years before she ever walked into that office wearing ambition like perfume. I had never hidden to deceive her. I had hidden because I wanted to know whether I was loved without the crown. That night, under those chandeliers, I finally got my answer. Chad raised his glass higher. To Emily, he said, grinning. Proof that every queen needs a quiet man carrying her purse. The table burst open with laughter. Emily's smile widened before she caught herself. I watched her catch it. That hurt more than if she had never tried. The room blurred at the edges for a second, not from tears, not from weakness, but from the strange clarity that arrives when respect dies. I straightened my jacket, looked at Chad, then at Emily, and let the silence stretch just long enough for a few people to notice. You're right about one thing, I said calmly. I have been in the background for a long time. The laughter thinned. Chad blinked, still smiling but less certain now. Emily's eyes narrowed. She knew my calm voice. She had heard it during bank emergencies, hospital calls, and the night our basement flooded with 6 inches of water. It was the voice I used when panic became useless. I picked up my glass, not to drink, just to give my hand somewhere civilized to be. But backgrounds have a way of becoming visible, I said, especially when the lights come on. Nobody laughed at that. Across the ballroom, Richard Hayes, the public CEO of Atlas Crown, looked over from the donor table. He must have felt the shift before he understood it. Good executives sense weather. Great ones know when lightning is about to hit. Emily leaned close and whispered through her smile, Jack, don't. 2 words. Not are you okay? Not I'm sorry. Just don't. That was the final answer I needed. I turned toward her, keeping my voice low enough that only our circle heard me. Don't worry, Emily, I said. I won't embarrass you. Her shoulders eased for half a second. Then I looked back at Chad. You already handled that part. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of swallowed laughs, shifting shoes, and the faint hum of a microphone being tested near the stage. Somewhere, a fork touched porcelain. Somewhere, someone realized the quiet husband was not folding. Chad gave a short laugh, trying to pull the room back to his side. Easy, buddy. It was just a joke. I nodded once. That is what people usually call it when they expect someone else to pay the bill. His smile faltered. Emily's face changed then, just slightly, like a curtain moving in a house with no open windows. She knew me well enough to know I was done asking to be seen. What she did not know was that in less than 24 hours, every person in that ballroom would learn exactly who had been standing quietly at her side, and Chad Morrison would discover that the man he called background was the only reason he had a chair at the table. After leaving the ballroom, I walked down the quiet hallway toward the private elevator. The muffled chatter and laughter from the event seemed to cling to the walls like a thin fog, the echo of Emily's smile still burning in my mind. I pressed the button for the underground parking garage, my steps deliberate, slow, and measured. The elevator doors closed, and for a moment, the city below felt distant, almost unreal. Outside, Chicago's November wind rattled the windows of the hotel, but in that moment, all I felt was stillness, a quiet that demanded attention. I let my mind replay the evening in detail, noting each glance, each laugh, each subtle movement that had signaled a world unaware of what I had built, a world assuming I was invisible. I reached into my coat pocket and touched the business card I had tucked there earlier, the contact information for our corporate attorney and the board liaison, my assurance that strategy always had a path forward. My car was a black Lincoln Navigator waiting in the underground lot, headlights cutting through the dim light like twin search beams, and I slid behind the wheel, letting the engine idle as I exhaled. Every detail mattered now. The precise angle of Emily's laugh, the way Chad had leaned too far forward, the subtle smirk from the finance director who had clearly underestimated my presence, and the shifting stance of Richard Hayes at the donor table. Each observation was a piece of a puzzle, one I had been assembling long before tonight, silently, without fanfare or recognition. I remembered the first time I had established my holding structures for Atlas Crown, the quiet hours in a small office above a tire shop, contracts laid out on the floor, lamps burning past midnight. Nobody had seen me then, and nobody saw me now, but everything I touched, every move, every signature, was part of the architecture of influence I wielded. I dialed the attorney on my cell, the number memorized after years of late calls and planning sessions, and explained the evening with precise clarity, careful to note who had said what and who had assumed what about my role. The attorney listened quietly, asking measured questions, confirming details, and together we mapped the next steps. We would not need to raise our voices. The strategy was already embedded in legal frameworks, in account holds, and in the subtle leverage of board decisions. As the navigator glided onto Michigan Avenue, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement, I allowed myself a brief smile, a quiet acknowledgement of how patience and preparation worked in tandem. Emily had thought the evening belonged to her. Chad had assumed I was merely background. Neither realized that by the end of the next day, the perception of power would shift irrevocably. I stopped at a small diner off State Street, one I had frequented years ago when Atlas Crown's logistics expansion was only a concept scribbled on napkins. I ordered black coffee, strong enough to keep me alert, but not so bitter as to mask the calm I needed to maintain. I watched through the window as taxis rushed past, pedestrians bundled in coats and scarves, oblivious to the chessboard moving silently among them. This was not about revenge in the emotional sense. It was about rectifying assumptions, revealing reality. Every move was calculated, every detail accounted for, every pause and action intentional. I took notes on a small legal pad, documenting every observed slight, every laugh, every microexpression. I reviewed account permissions, checking the hold statuses I had already arranged, confirming the reach of our audit, knowing the board would follow through as agreed. I thought of Emily again, the way her confidence had been so absolute, so unearned, so reliant on ignorance of the true structure of the company. She did not understand that true influence is quiet, patient, and cumulative, not performative or dependent on applause. As I finished my coffee and slid back into the navigator, the night air was crisp, carrying the faint aroma of street vendors and exhaust, grounding me in reality. I set the GPS for my office downtown, preparing for a late night of calls, strategy sessions, and final confirmations. Every detail of tonight's humiliation had been cataloged, every observation noted, and every action planned. When I finally arrived at the office, the city still glowing around me, I sat behind my desk, the same one I had used years ago to sign initial contracts and draft first expansions. I leaned back, feeling the weight of control and clarity settle into my shoulders. Emily and her guests would awaken tomorrow to a world subtly but undeniably different, and the subtle shift in power would be complete. I opened my laptop, reviewed the list of stakeholders and notifications, and began the execution of a plan that had been years in the making, each step silent, precise, and unstoppable. The first phase was set. The evening's embarrassment had become the catalyst for the revelation of truth, and I moved with the confidence of a man who knew every piece of the board, every account, and every signature could now speak louder than any laughter from a ballroom. The office was quiet except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights above, the faint clicking of keyboards from the security team monitoring the audit logs, and the occasional rustle of paper as I reviewed the permissions and account holds I had set in motion earlier. Jack Reynolds leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes tracing the lines of the financial charts projected on the monitor, each number a piece of the silent authority he had quietly amassed over the past 15 years. The city outside glowed like liquid gold in the late November night, streetlights reflecting off wet pavement, taxis weaving through traffic, oblivious to the shifts in power happening several floors above. He opened his laptop and reviewed the list of people who would receive notifications once the first actions were triggered: board members, department heads, and legal counsel, all meticulously coordinated so that when the room discovered what had been hidden in plain sight, the effect would be undeniable. Each email draft, each attached document, was checked 3 times, ensuring clarity and precision. There could be no misinterpretation, no hesitation in the delivery of truth. He paused, taking a sip of black coffee, the bitterness sharp, grounding him, sharpening his focus. His mind wandered briefly back to Emily, her silver dress, and the confidence she radiated at the gala, a force built on appearances and selective knowledge. She had believed that charm and beauty could overshadow experience and influence, that laughter and applause were more powerful than the structures underpinning a corporation. Jack had let her believe that because he knew patience and timing would accomplish more than confrontation ever could. He leaned forward, fingers dancing across the keyboard as he finalized the first notification batch, every detail of the room, the people, the timing, synchronized for maximum effect. He reviewed each account hold, ensuring the transfer authorizations were restricted and any adjustments triggered alerts to the necessary legal channels, a dance of bureaucracy disguised as everyday procedure. The soft light from his desk lamp illuminated the precision of his notes, annotations of who spoke what, who laughed at whose expense, reminders of the subtle vulnerabilities each person had displayed. This was not about vengeance in a reckless sense. It was a calculated demonstration of reality, the unveiling of a hierarchy they had all underestimated. He mapped the next phase in his mind, the subtle release of information that would allow observers to reconstruct the evening at the gala and see it from the perspective of authority and control rather than embarrassment. The quiet rhythm of his actions contrasted sharply with the chaos of the social event hours earlier. Every measured keystroke, every confirmation message, and every coordination call reinforced the latent power he held beneath the surface of ordinary life. Jack stretched back in his chair, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility and command settle into his shoulders. He reviewed the company ledger, the board resolutions, the contracts with executives, and the legal directives, each a brick in the foundation of influence that few, including Emily, had ever noticed. Outside, a taxi honked, a pedestrian passed, and the world continued unaware of the precise orchestration unfolding in that office. He allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction, not indulgence, a recognition that he had turned the tables without raising his voice, without theatrics, relying solely on strategy, foresight, and patience. Every detail was accounted for. The timing of account holds, the preparation of board members, the legal notifications, and the audit trail that would leave no room for doubt. Jack checked his watch, noting the time down to the minute, planning the rollout of the next phase as the first glimmers of dawn crept over the city skyline. He stood and moved to the window, hands resting on the sill, surveying the city that had been a silent witness to his ascent, a backdrop to the revelation about to unfold. Emily had thought the night belonged to her and her social circle. She had not anticipated that Jack Reynolds, the quiet husband who had never needed recognition, would demonstrate in the clearest terms who truly held authority, not with anger or drama, but with calm, undeniable precision. He took a deep breath, allowed the faint aroma of early morning coffee drifting from a nearby diner to fill his senses, and prepared to implement the next step, knowing that every observation, every calculation, and every controlled action would culminate in a revelation that would be impossible to ignore. The office lights reflected off the glass of his desk, off the monitor, off the city beyond, creating a lattice of brightness and shadow, a visual metaphor for the unfolding truth, the layers of understanding that had remained hidden until now. Jack sat down once more, fingertips hovering above the keys, ready to set the final sequence in motion, every movement deliberate, precise, and controlled, the calm before the inevitable realization, the quiet that would command attention more effectively than any words or confrontation ever could. The stage was set, the pieces aligned, and the only task remaining was the careful, calculated release of information, the unveiling of a hidden reality, and the confirmation of authority and competence that had been underestimated by everyone in the room hours ago. The first light of morning began to filter through the tall windows of my office, painting the polished wood floors with thin stripes of pale gold. Jack Reynolds sat at his desk, tracing the edges of a confidential report that would soon shift the perception of the entire company. Outside, the city had woken, traffic moving steadily along Michigan Avenue, pedestrians bundled in coats and scarves, unaware of the quiet orchestration unfolding several floors above. He opened a second laptop to cross-reference audit alerts, making sure every account, every departmental authorization, and every board notification aligned perfectly with the timeline he had plotted the night before. Emily had left the hotel early, unaware that her assumptions of invisibility would be challenged with the first domino falling within hours. The coffee on his desk steamed gently, black and bitter, grounding him in the calm precision that guided every move he made. Jack reviewed the sequence one last time. The legal notices were queued, the financial holds confirmed, and the executive summaries prepared for the board members who had been briefed on protocol, but not yet on the extent of the revelation. Each step had been calculated for maximum clarity and minimal confusion, ensuring that the truth would be visible and undeniable without a single unnecessary word. He leaned back slightly, letting the chair support his weight as his mind wandered briefly to the gala, to the laughter and smirks, to the assumptions of those who had thought the evening belonged to them. It did not belong to them. Not truly. Jack had built Atlas Crown with patience, with diligence, with attention to every detail that would not appear on a resume or in a public announcement, and the quiet strength of that work would now speak louder than any performance on a ballroom stage. He opened a folder containing the communications he had drafted for board members, attachments detailing the strategic restructuring, account authorizations, and a note explaining the timeline of the gala, noting who had spoken, who had laughed, and who had assumed his role was inconsequential. Each sentence was precise, devoid of emotion, crafted for clarity and impact. Jack ran his fingers along the edges of the desk, remembering the years spent quietly ensuring that every contract, every signature, and every decision he had made in private would one day protect the company and confirm his authority. He did not need applause. He did not need recognition. He needed results. Results were coming. A notification pinged from the system. The first hold on a key department account had been successfully implemented, and the automated alert had been sent to the legal liaison. The domino had started to fall. Jack sipped his coffee again, the warmth sharp against the chill of the morning. He considered Emily. Briefly, her confidence and charm, her assumptions of control, her reliance on appearances. It had been years since she had noticed the full scope of his influence, and tonight, she would begin to understand the careful construction that had been happening under her nose all along. Jack reviewed the audit logs again, confirming that the sequence of alerts and holds would trigger a chain reaction visible to the board and executives, but controlled and precise. He could almost imagine their reactions: surprise, confusion, and finally clarity as they recognized the orchestration and authority that had been underestimated. The city beyond the windows was waking, taxis honking, delivery trucks rumbling along wet pavement, but inside the office, the world was still, deliberate, calculated, and precise. Jack drafted the final confirmation emails, attaching documentation and notes that outlined exactly what had occurred, ensuring that the narrative of the evening would be clear and incontrovertible. He leaned back, letting the quiet settle over him, appreciating the calm before the controlled revelation spread. The first domino was falling, and with each subsequent action, the room, the company, and Emily would witness the culmination of years of careful planning, silent authority, and strategic patience. The sun rose higher, golden light spilling across charts and documents, and Jack Reynolds, quiet, controlled, deliberate, and confident, prepared to watch the unfolding of truth, knowing that his measured actions would soon command attention, respect, and undeniable recognition for the work he had done in silence. Jack Reynolds watched the morning unfold from his office window, the city alive with motion, the streets reflecting the soft glow of a rising sun off wet asphalt. He leaned back in his chair, letting the quiet hum of the building settle around him, the faint sound of elevators moving in the distance providing a rhythm that kept his mind steady. Emily had left for a client meeting earlier, unaware that every move she had made the night before had already triggered a series of controlled responses. Jack opened a secure line to the board members, sending the final confirmations of audit holds and financial notices, each message crafted to ensure clarity and prevent misinterpretation. The first domino had fallen, and the subsequent chain reaction would reveal the depth of his involvement and authority, leaving no room for assumptions about his position. He checked the schedules of department heads, confirming that meetings would coincide with the notifications, creating opportunities for observation and acknowledgement of the changes he had implemented. Every detail had been anticipated: the timing, the recipients, and the visibility of each action to the appropriate parties. Jack reflected on the gala, on the laughter that had echoed across the ballroom, the casual glances, and the unearned confidence displayed by Emily and Chad Morrison. He allowed himself a brief moment to appreciate the meticulousness of his planning, the patience that had been exercised over years, allowing him to respond not with impulsive emotion, but with deliberate authority. The city outside continued its morning rhythm, pedestrians hurrying along sidewalks, taxis weaving through traffic, and delivery trucks rumbling across bridges, entirely unaware of the strategic orchestration occurring above them. He sipped black coffee, its bitterness a sharp contrast to the calm he maintained, a reminder that vigilance required both focus and discipline. Jack opened a secure folder containing the communications drafted for executive staff, including detailed instructions, timelines, and anticipated responses. Each document had been carefully reviewed, formatted for clarity, and cross-referenced to prevent any possibility of misunderstanding. He took a deep breath and reviewed the audit logs once more, confirming that every hold, every restriction, and every notification had been successfully queued. The legal team had confirmed compliance with corporate regulations, ensuring that the unfolding events would be supported by structure and authority. Jack allowed himself to visualize the reactions of those involved, the subtle shock of realization, the recognition of his previously hidden influence, and the quiet acknowledgement of the meticulous control he had exercised without fanfare or spectacle. He considered Emily, her poised exterior, and the carefully curated image she projected to colleagues and clients alike, and he knew that the perception of power she had relied upon was about to shift. Jack opened his calendar, reviewing the sequence of upcoming calls and meetings, ensuring that every conversation would reinforce the changes already set in motion and that no one could inadvertently disrupt the flow of events. The sun rose higher, and the light across his desk illuminated the documents and charts, highlighting the precision with which each action had been arranged. He allowed his mind to trace the steps that had led him here, years of strategic planning, silent authority, and the cultivation of influence that had gone unnoticed but never unused. Jack leaned back, hands resting lightly on the desk, appreciating the calm before the controlled revelation fully unfolded, knowing that by the end of the day, the understanding of his role, authority, and foresight would be evident to all. He considered the subtle cues he had observed the night before, translating them into calculated actions that would reveal both competence and presence. Every email sent, every hold placed, and every alert triggered was a note in a larger symphony of clarity and recognition. Jack felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, not indulgence, knowing that patience, strategy, and deliberate action were far more powerful than any reaction born of emotion or haste. The office remained silent except for the distant hum of machinery and the faint click of keyboards, the city outside unaware but moving in rhythm with the unfolding orchestration above it. Jack Reynolds reviewed one final time the sequence of alerts, holds, and communications, confirming that the network of information and observation was complete, each piece ready to reinforce the reality of his authority and the meticulous planning that had gone unseen for so long. He leaned forward, fingers poised over the keyboard, prepared to implement the next step in a process designed for precision, clarity, and undeniable impact, ensuring that every participant would come to recognize the depth of control and strategic foresight that had been quietly maintained for years. By 9:15 that morning, the first reaction reached my office without anyone knocking on my door. It arrived as a forwarded email from Richard Hayes with only 4 words typed above the message thread: "We need to talk." I stared at those words for a moment, not because they surprised me, but because they carried the exact weight I expected. The audit notice had reached the executive floor. The account restrictions had appeared on the finance dashboard. The board packet had landed in the private inboxes of people who had spent years treating me like a quiet investor with no appetite for involvement. Appetite had nothing to do with it. I had stayed out of the spotlight because the company ran better when pride was not standing in front of the numbers. But pride had entered the room last night wearing a tuxedo, holding a champagne glass, and calling me background. I replied to Richard with one sentence: "Conference room 12, 10:30. Then I closed the laptop and let the silence settle again. My office smelled faintly of coffee, printer toner, and the leather of old folders that had survived more storms than most executives. On the wall near the window, I kept one framed photograph almost no one ever noticed. It was not a ribbon cutting or magazine cover. It was a picture of a narrow upstairs office outside Detroit, the one above the tire shop, taken during the winter of 2009. The carpet was stained. The radiator hissed like it was angry at the world. On the desk sat a second-hand monitor, a stack of unpaid invoices, and a paper cup from a gas station 2 blocks away. That was Atlas Crown before the polished lobby, before the expansion into Chicago, before Emily ever learned to say its name like it belonged to her. I looked at that photograph longer than usual, because mornings like this make a man remember the cost of being underestimated. People see the finished building and think it rose from the ground clean. They do not see the nights you drive 400 miles on 2 hours of sleep because a client in St. Louis is about to cancel. They do not see you eating a vending machine dinner in a parking lot while your phone battery sits at 3% and your bank account has less than a tank of gas in it. They do not see the winter you almost missed payroll and sold your grandfather's watch to cover 2 employees who had kids at home. They see the suit. They see the quiet. Then they decide silence means weakness. At 9:40, my assistant, Maria, stepped in with a folder against her chest. Maria was 58, sharp as a tax form, and had known me since the company still used folding chairs in the conference room. She did not ask if I was all right. Good assistants know better than to ask questions with obvious answers. She placed the folder on my desk and said, "Legal confirmed all notices were delivered. Finance is confused, but compliant. Richard has called twice." I nodded. "Emily." Maria's expression shifted by less than an inch. That was all it took. She arrived at the office at 9:28. She went straight to Chad Morrison's floor. There it was. Not human resources. Not her manager. Not me. Chad. I gave a small nod, and Maria understood that I had heard more than the words. In business, movement tells the truth before statements do. "Thank you," I said. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it is worth, sir, people who laugh too loud usually know they have borrowed the room." Then she left before I could answer. I almost smiled. Almost. At 10:27, I walked toward conference room 12 with the folder in my left hand and nothing in my right. The hallway was busier than usual, but conversation seemed to thin as I passed. News had begun moving through the company like weather through wheat. People did not know what had happened, only that something had shifted. That is the thing about authority. Even before it speaks, rooms adjust around it. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I saw Richard Hayes already seated at the head of the table, silver hair perfect, jaw tight, hands folded too neatly. Beside him were 2 board members on the video screen, our general counsel and the chief financial officer, a man named Alan Pierce who looked like he had slept poorly and dressed quickly. Chad Morrison stood near the window with his arms crossed, trying to look irritated instead of nervous. Emily sat 2 seats away from him, still dressed like she had come from a magazine spread, cream blouse, dark pencil skirt, hair pulled back, phone face down on the table. When she saw me through the glass, her face did something strange. It did not soften. It calculated. I opened the door, walked in, and placed the folder on the table. No one spoke for 2 seconds. 2 seconds is not long unless everyone in the room is waiting for the same man to explain why their morning stopped being normal. Richard cleared his throat. "Jack, we received several notices this morning regarding account restrictions and board-level review procedures. I assume there is an explanation." I sat down across from him, not at the head of the table. I did not need the chair to prove the structure. "There is," I said. Chad let out a breath through his nose, the kind of sound men make when they want witnesses to their impatience. "Can we skip the theater? Some of us have departments to run." I turned my eyes to him slowly. Not sharply. Slowly. That bothered him more. "You will have time to discuss your department," I said. "Assuming it remains yours after this meeting." His arms dropped from their folded position. Emily looked at me then, really looked, and I saw the first crack in her certainty. Richard leaned forward. "Jack, what exactly is going on?" I opened the folder and slid the first page across the table. It was a clean ownership summary, simple enough for anyone to understand, direct enough that no one could pretend confusion. Atlas Crown Technologies, majority voting control held through Reynolds Strategic Holdings. Authorized controlling member, Jack Reynolds. The room changed temperature without the air conditioning moving. Alan Pierce picked up the page first. His eyes ran down the lines, then back up, then toward Richard. The board members on the screen leaned closer. General Counsel did not look surprised, because she had known for years. Richard looked like a man hearing a floorboard creak under a house he thought was solid. Chad frowned. What is this supposed to mean? I looked at him. It means the quiet husband from last night signs your executive authority. No one moved. Emily's hand slid toward her phone, then stopped halfway, as if even she understood there was no one useful to call. I turned to Richard and kept my voice even. The account restrictions are temporary. The audit is not. After last night's public conduct by senior personnel, and after several irregularities already flagged in discretionary spending, I am initiating a governance review. Chad's face tightened. Because of a joke? I let the question hang there, small and exposed. No, I said. Because a joke showed me who believed there would be no consequences. Chad stared at the ownership summary like the words might rearrange themselves if he looked hard enough. They did not. Paper has a cruel kind of honesty. It does not care how loudly a man laughed the night before. It does not care how expensive his watch is or how many people nodded when he spoke. It simply sits there, clean and still, carrying facts that do not need permission. Richard Hayes removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture I had seen only twice before, both times during acquisitions that almost collapsed at closing. Alan Pierce kept scanning the document, lips moving slightly as he followed the chain of entities from Atlas Crown Technologies to Reynolds Strategic Holdings, then back to my name. Emily was the quietest one in the room. That should have pleased me. It did not. Silence from someone who finally understands the size of a mistake is not satisfaction. It is just a different kind of sadness. I looked at her once, long enough to see the color drain from her polished confidence, then turned back to the table. This review is not emotional, I said. It is operational. General Counsel, Denise Walton, nodded once from the far end of the table. Denise had the calm face of a woman who had spent 20 years watching powerful people discover consequences. For the record, she said, the controlling member has full authority to initiate temporary account restrictions, executive conduct review, and discretionary spending audit under Section 7 of the governance agreement. Chad gave a short laugh, but there was no air in it. So that is it. One awkward joke at a dinner, and now we are pretending this is some corporate emergency. I opened the second page of the folder and slid it toward Denise instead of him. No, I said. The dinner only made me look closer. That was the first real turn of the knife, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. Chad's face tightened. Emily's eyes flicked to him. Fast. Almost invisible. But I saw it. So did Denise. So did Maria, who stood outside the glass wall with her tablet pressed to her chest, pretending not to notice anything while noticing everything. Denise reviewed the page and placed it in front of Richard. These are preliminary findings, she said. Unapproved vendor entertainment reimbursements, duplicated travel claims, and 3 consulting invoices connected to a firm incorporated 8 months ago in Delaware. Alan Pierce sat straighter. I flagged one of those invoices last quarter. Chad turned toward him. You flagged it because you flag everything. That does not mean anything improper happened. His voice was louder now. Too loud for a glass-walled conference room, where half the executive floor could see mouths moving even if they could not hear the words. I watched him make the same mistake twice in 24 hours. He thought volume created authority. It does not. It only fills space where proof should be. I folded my hands on the table. The audit will determine what happened. Emily finally spoke, her voice carefully smooth. Jack, this is becoming extreme. There it was. Not concern about the findings. Not shock at the documents. Concern about optics. I turned to her. Extreme was listening to my wife laugh while a man under my authority called me useless in a room full of employees. Her mouth opened, then closed. For years, Emily had been skilled with words. She could soften a room, redirect a question, make herself sound reasonable even when reason had left the building. But there are moments when language refuses to serve you. That was one of them. Richard set the page down and looked at Chad. Did you know about Reynolds? Strategic Holdings? Chad scoffed. Of course not. Nobody did. Denise corrected him gently. Some people did. That sentence landed softer than a whisper and harder than a gavel. The board member on the video screen, a retired banker named Howard Bell, leaned forward. Mr. Reynolds, what outcome are you seeking today? I respected the question. It cut through noise and went straight to structure. First, formal executive conduct review for Chad Morrison. Second, immediate preservation of all expense records, communications with listed vendors, and discretionary approvals from the past 12 months. Third, Richard remains public chief executive during the review, but all major spending above $25,000 requires controlling member approval until further notice. Fourth, Emily Reynolds is recused from any internal communications or decisions involving this matter due to personal conflict. Emily sat back as if the chair had moved under her. You are removing me? I am recusing you, I said. There is a difference. I did nothing wrong. The words came quickly, too quickly. I looked at her, and for a second the conference room disappeared. I saw our first apartment in Columbus, the one with the noisy heater and the narrow kitchen where we used to eat takeout straight from the cartons because we could not afford a dining table yet. I saw her at 27, barefoot on moving day, laughing because the couch got stuck in the hallway. I saw the woman who once told me she liked that I did not need to impress strangers. Somewhere between that woman and the one sitting across from me, applause had become oxygen. I came back to the room slowly. Last night, you chose the room, I said. Today, I am choosing the company. Her eyes shined, but no tear fell. Emily never liked witnesses to anything she could not control. Chad pushed back from the table. This is personal. Everyone here can see that. I nodded. Yes, it became personal when you made it public. Then I opened the final document in the folder and turned it toward the screen so the board could see the heading. Executive Morality Clause and Reputational Risk Standard. Chad's expression shifted again, from irritation to something smaller, sharper. Recognition. Richard looked at the page and exhaled. Chad, you signed this when you accepted the offer. Everybody signs those, Chad said. Nobody enforces them over jokes. Denise spoke without looking up. They are enforced over conduct that damages leadership credibility, creates hostile public circumstances for stakeholders, or reveals judgment inconsistent with executive trust. The room went still. There are silences that feel empty, and there are silences that feel like a door locking. This was the second kind. Alan Pierce looked down at his notebook. Howard Bell on the screen folded his hands. Richard stared at Chad with the expression of a man measuring not friendship, but liability. Emily finally turned toward Chad, and the look between them said more than either of them wanted it to say. It was not romance. It was alliance under pressure, and pressure is where weak alliances start to leak. I stood, buttoning my jacket. The review begins now. Chad, Denise will coordinate with your office. Emily, you will return to your department and avoid communication about this matter unless legal requests it. Richard, I expect a company-wide professionalism reminder by 2 this afternoon. No names. No theatrics. Just standards. Nobody challenged me. That was the first time all morning no one challenged me. I gathered the folder, but left the ownership summary on the table. Some truths deserve to remain visible. As I reached the door, Emily said my name. Not Jack in the bright social tone she used at dinners. Not honey, the word she had used when she wanted something smoothed over. Just my name, small and uncertain. I stopped, but did not turn around right away. Did you plan all of this because of last night? She asked. I looked back then. No, I said. I planned the structure years ago to protect what I built. Last night only told me who needed to be outside the walls. Her face changed again, and this time there was no performance left in it. I walked out into the hallway, where the office noise had gone thin and careful. People looked away too late. Phones lowered. Conversations paused. Not because I had shouted. Not because I had threatened anyone. Because the background had stepped forward, and the room finally understood that it had been standing in my light all along. By noon, the company had changed shape without moving a single wall. The same glass offices stood in the same rows. The same elevators opened with the same soft chime. The same reception desk smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh flowers. But people felt the difference. You could hear it in the lowered voices near the break room. See it in the way executives checked their phones before stepping into meetings. Sense it in the pause that followed whenever my name was mentioned. Respect does not always arrive as applause. Sometimes it arrives as people suddenly becoming careful with the truth. I returned to my office after the meeting and found Maria waiting with a printed copy of the professionalism memo Richard had drafted. She had circled 3 sentences in red ink because Maria believed weak language was a weed that needed pulling early. I read the memo once, then twice. It said nothing about Chad, nothing about Emily, nothing about the gala. It only reminded senior leadership that public conduct, internal culture, and fiduciary judgment were not separate categories. They were the same mirror viewed from different angles. I approved it with 2 small edits and handed it back. Maria glanced at the hallway, then lowered her voice just enough. Mr. Morrison has been in his office with the door closed for 40 minutes. Miss Reynolds tried to speak with him twice. I looked up from the page. Tried. He did not let her in the second time. There it was again. Pressure revealing architecture. Last night, Chad had stood beside her like borrowed confidence. Today, he was protecting himself behind a closed door. I thanked Maria and opened the secure audit dashboard. Numbers do not blush. They do not apologize. They do not pretend a laugh was harmless. They simply line up and wait to be understood. The preliminary report was already growing teeth. 3 travel reimbursements from Chad's office had been submitted during weeks when his calendar showed him in Chicago. 2 vendor dinners listed 4 attendees, but card receipts showed charges closer to 10. A consulting firm called North Harbor Strategy had billed Atlas Crown $78,000 in 3 months for advisory work no department head could describe clearly. The amounts were not large enough to sink a company. That was not the point. Character rarely announces itself with one giant failure. More often, it leaks through small permissions a person gives himself because he thinks nobody important is watching. I forwarded the findings to Denise and added one line. Preserve everything. At 12:38, Emily called me. I watched her name glow on my phone until it stopped. Then it started again. On the 3rd call, I answered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear the faint hum of office air through her line, the quiet rustle of movement, the sound of someone trying to find a private place in a building that suddenly felt too public. Jack, she said. Her voice was softer than it had been in the conference room. Can we talk like husband and wife instead of whatever this is? That sentence almost worked. Not because it was fair, but because some part of me still remembered being 29 and believing we were the kind of people who could sit at a kitchen table and repair anything before midnight. But memory is not evidence. And love without respect becomes a room with pretty curtains and no foundation. We can talk at home, I said, after business hours. This is humiliating, she whispered. I closed my eyes for 1 second. There it was. The word. Humiliating. It sounded different coming from her mouth now that she was wearing it instead of handing it to me. Yes, I said. It is. She drew a sharp breath. You know what I mean. I do. People are staring at me. People stared at me last night. Silence. Not empty. Loaded. I could hear her choosing which version of herself to send next. The wounded wife, the reasonable professional, the offended executive, the woman who had always trusted her charm to smooth sharp edges. I should have stopped him, she said finally. It was the first honest sentence she had given me all day. I let it sit there. Some apologies come dressed as explanations. This one had arrived barefoot, late, and shaking. Yes, I said. You should have. I was caught off guard. No, I said calmly. You laughed before you were caught. Her breathing changed. A tiny sound, barely there, but I heard it. For years, I had listened to Emily breathe in dark rooms, on long drives, beside hospital beds, after arguments we pretended were smaller than they were. I knew the sound of guilt finding no exit. Are you trying to punish me? She asked. I looked through the glass at the city beyond my office, at the winter sun flashing off windows 30 stories high. I am trying to stop protecting people from the consequences of what they choose in public. And Chad, she asked too quickly. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I thought anything improper was happening between them, though I would have been a fool not to notice the way she had leaned toward his orbit. It hurt because even now, her instinct was to check the damage around him. Chad will answer to the audit, I said. You will answer to me tonight. She did not respond. Then she said, quieter, I did not know you still had that much control. That was the sentence that ended something. Not I did not know I hurt you. Not I did not know you felt alone. I did not know you still had that much control. I leaned back in my chair and felt the old warmth drain from the memory of us. That is the problem, Emily, I said. You only became careful when you learned what I could do. Before she could answer, Denise knocked once on my open door and lifted a folder. I told Emily I had to go and ended the call without waiting for permission. Denise stepped in, placed the folder on my desk, and her expression told me the audit had found something sharper than messy receipts. North Harbor strategy, she said. The registered agent is clean, but the bank routing leads to a business account with a secondary authorized user. I opened the folder. The name was printed halfway down the page, plain black letters on white paper. Chad Morrison. Beneath it was another name, one I did not expect to see, but recognized immediately from Emily's department. Paperwork. Claire Whitman, Emily's closest office friend, the woman who had smiled at me last night as if I was a chair pulled too close to the table. Denise watched my face. "We are still verifying," she said. "But it appears Chad may have been approving invoices tied to a firm he could access indirectly." The room seemed to narrow, not from shock, but from focus. Last night had not created the problem. It had uncovered the arrogance around it. That is how rot works. It hides under polished wood until someone steps hard enough in the wrong place. I closed the folder gently. "Continue verification." Quietly. Denise nodded. "And Emily?" I looked toward the hallway, where people moved more softly than they had that morning. "Leave Emily out of the loop," I said. "For now." By 2 in the afternoon, Richard's memo landed in every inbox. By 2:15, Chad's calendar had been frozen. By 2:30, North Harbor Strategies' access to company systems had been suspended pending review. And by 3, Emily was standing outside my office. No silver ballroom smile, no polished public mask, just a woman realizing the room she had chosen last night was no longer choosing her back. By late afternoon, the office had settled into a cautious rhythm, the usual clatter replaced by a quiet attentiveness that only comes when everyone senses a shift in the invisible rules. Jack Reynolds remained at his desk, reviewing the updated audit logs, tracking each flagged expense, each email trail, and every access granted or revoked over the past 6 hours. The numbers told the story better than any conversation could. They revealed missteps, assumptions, and decisions made under the belief that authority could be ignored or underestimated. Emily stood near the window, arms crossed, watching employees move through the corridors with a subtle wariness that mirrored her own newfound unease. She glanced at Chad, who was seated in a corner office with the door closed, his phone lying face down on his desk, a silent acknowledgement that the unfolding situation had exceeded his comfort zone. Jack's phone vibrated softly, a reminder of the scheduled virtual meeting with board members reviewing the interim findings. He opened the secure line and watched as each participant's name appeared on screen, their faces a mixture of anticipation and tension. Richard Hayes, maintaining his composure as always, was first to speak. "Mr. Reynolds, the initial reports are quite thorough. What do you propose as the next step?" Jack leaned slightly forward, voice steady, deliberate. "We continue the review and preserve all evidence. Any irregularities identified will be addressed with full compliance to corporate governance standards, and no personal influence will interfere with the process." Emily swallowed, the weight of the words settling in the room like sunlight cutting through a fogged window. She had relied on her social finesse for years, but now the quiet, methodical unfolding of structure and authority made her smile falter. Chad finally spoke, his voice low and controlled. "I was unaware of some of these items." Jack's eyes met his through the screen. "Awareness does not excuse oversight, Mr. Morrison, nor does confidence in a title replace accountability." Denise Walton, General Counsel, nodded in agreement, adding the legal framework to reinforce Jack's point. The digital clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second accentuating the gravity of the structured, silent action that had been set in motion. Jack turned his attention back to the office floor, observing as managers consulted with their teams, the atmosphere shifting from casual to focused, the awareness that oversight now had teeth evident in every gesture, every glance. By 3:45, the final notifications were in place. Account restrictions formalized, audit schedules distributed, and governance documentation logged and secured. Jack stood, stretching briefly, and allowed himself a moment to observe the room, the employees, the executives, and even Emily, who now understood that charm alone could not protect her from the consequences of a public display. He walked to the window and looked out over Michigan Avenue, the late afternoon sun reflecting off the wet pavement, taxis moving in measured rhythm, pedestrians unaware of the invisible currents guiding their morning interactions, much like the silent authority now directing the company from behind a desk. Jack returned to his chair, opened the final folder, and reviewed the notes he had prepared for his private reflection. Every decision, every observation, every strategic step had been recorded, ensuring clarity, precision, and accountability. Emily lingered at the doorway, hesitant, the unspoken realization that the balance of power had shifted tangible in the room. She finally spoke, voice quieter than expected. "Jack, I did not realize how much you controlled until now." He looked at her calmly. "Control is not about dominating people, Emily. It is about ensuring that what is built is preserved and understood. Last night revealed the assumptions. Today revealed the structure." She nodded slowly, a gesture of acknowledgement, not triumph, as the weight of understanding settled over her. Jack returned to his desk, picking up the pen he had been using to mark observations, and wrote a single line in the margin of his notes. "Authority is quiet until it is necessary to speak." The office remained still, the city outside glowing with late afternoon light, a backdrop to the calculated, deliberate, and undeniable reality he had created. Every participant in the unfolding sequence would remember the day not for drama, not for confrontation, but for clarity, precision, and the methodical demonstration of influence, a lesson in patience, strategy, and the quiet power of deliberate action.